Think about the last time you faced a high-stakes challenge, maybe a crucial business decision, a leadership test, or a moment where everything hinged on your ability to read the room. Now picture this. Those same pressures, those same psychological battles, were fought centuries ago on blood-soaked battlefields by generals who understood human nature in ways that still shock us today. This isn't just history, it's a playbook for modern success, because while the weapons have changed, the minds behind them haven't. The greatest military leaders of antiquity didn't just win wars, they mastered the art of influence, persuasion, and strategic thinking, skills that translate eerily well to the boardrooms and negotiation tables of our world. Take Sun Tzu, the legendary Chinese strategist who wrote The Art of War over 2,000 years ago. His teachings weren't just about swords and shields, they were about understanding fear, motivation, and the hidden currents of human behavior. He knew that victory wasn't just about strength, it was about psychology, and here's the fascinating part, those insights are just as potent today. Whether you're leading a team, closing a deal, or navigating office politics, the principles that guided ancient generals can give you an edge. Because human nature hasn't changed, the same instincts that drove soldiers to follow Alexander the Great into impossible battles still drive people in meetings, sales pitches, and leadership roles. So how did these commanders wield psychology like a weapon? How did Hannibal outthink Rome's armies with nothing but cunning and a deep understanding of his enemies' minds? Or how did Genghis Khan unite fractious tribes into history's most formidable empire? The answers lie in their mastery of persuasion, timing, and emotional intelligence, tools you can use today. In this video, we're going to unpack their secrets, bridging the gap between ancient battlefields and modern boardrooms. You'll discover how to anticipate opponents' moves, inspire loyalty, and turn pressure into advantage, just like the generals who shaped history. Because whether you're facing a corporate rival or a personal challenge, the psychology of victory remains the same, and by the end, you'll see leadership and human nature in a whole new light. Long before laboratories or clinical studies, the greatest military minds were already conducting groundbreaking experiments in human psychology, just not in the way you might expect. Their battlefield was their lab and their subjects' entire armies. Sun Tzu didn't have brain scans, but he didn't need them. He observed something far more telling: behavior under pressure. In The Art of War, he wrote that all conflict is based on deception, not just hiding troops, but manipulating how enemies perceive reality itself. That's psychology in its purest form. Take Hannibal's legendary crossing of the Alps. Every Roman commander assumed those mountains were an impenetrable barrier. But Hannibal didn't just move his army, he weaponized surprise, leveraging the Romans' own assumptions against them. He understood that confidence could be as dangerous as weakness, and he turned Rome's arrogance into a trap. This wasn't brute force, it was a masterclass in cognitive warfare. Centuries later, Napoleon would echo the same principle. The moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1. In other words, mental dominance outweighs sheer numbers every time. And then there's Alexander the Great, who didn't just conquer territories, he conquered loyalty. When his troops mutinied in India, exhausted after years of campaigning, he didn't punish them. He staged a public retreat, letting his soldiers see him grieve. That vulnerability forged an unbreakable bond. He knew leadership wasn't about commands, it was about connection. These generals weren't just tacticians, they were pioneers of motivation, group dynamics, and decision-making under stress. What's astonishing is how little has changed. Modern negotiators use Sun Tzu's principle of appearing weak when strong in high-stakes deals. CEOs channel Alexander's emotional intelligence to inspire teams. And every time someone anticipates a competitor's move before they make it, they're thinking like Hannibal. The tools may have evolved from swords to spreadsheets, but the human mind still reacts to the same triggers: fear, pride, uncertainty. That's why these ancient strategies don't just belong in history books, they're alive in every boardroom, courtroom, and conference call where persuasion decides the outcome. Sun Tzu's genius lay in recognizing that the most powerful weapon wasn't a sword or spear, it was perception. When he declared that all warfare is based on deception, he wasn't advocating dishonesty. He was revealing a profound truth about human psychology. We act based on what we believe to be true, not necessarily what is true, and that gap between perception and reality. That's where battles and deals are won. Take one of his most famous tactics, the feigned retreat. Ancient generals would pretend to flee in disarray, luring overconfident enemies into ambushes. But here's the modern twist. Ever noticed how some companies deliberately downplay their capabilities before a major product launch? That's Sun Tzu in a suit. Apple mastered this art for years, letting rivals underestimate their innovations until the moment they unveiled groundbreaking products that redefined entire industries. Then there's strategic ambiguity, another tool straight from The Art of War. Sun Tzu advised keeping adversaries perpetually off balance by never revealing your true intentions. Fast forward to today's corporate chessboard. Elon Musk's tweets about Tesla's next big move often send competitors scrambling to adjust strategies, wasting resources on hypothetical threats. It's not lying, it's controlling the narrative, but perhaps the most enduring lesson is this: deception isn't just about hiding your weaknesses, it's about magnifying your strengths. When Alexander the Great faced the seemingly invincible Persian army at Gaugamela, he didn't just outfight them. He staged elaborate ruses, campfires stretching for miles, cavalry maneuvers that exaggerated his numbers, to make his force appear unstoppable before the battle even began. Today's equivalent, a startup creating buzz with selective leaks to investors, making a 10-person team feel like an industry titan. The key is understanding that this isn't manipulation in the cynical sense. It's psychology applied with precision. Just as Sun Tzu knew when to appear weak to provoke arrogance or strong to sow doubt, modern leaders use timing and information asymmetry to steer outcomes. Because whether on an ancient battlefield or a Zoom negotiation, the mind remains the ultimate terrain of conquest, and those who master its contours don't just react to the game, they design it. Alexander the Great didn't lead from behind gilded thrones. He fought in the front lines, ate the same rations as his soldiers, and slept on the same hard ground. When his men hesitated to cross the frozen river during a brutal campaign, he didn't order them forward. He plunged in first, shouting over the rushing water that if they feared the cold, they should at least follow their king's example. That moment captures the essence of charismatic leadership. It's not about titles or authority, but about showing people you're willing to face what you ask of them. Modern psychology would later call this the principle of reciprocity, the human tendency to mirror commitment when we see it genuinely demonstrated. Alexander understood this instinctively. He didn't just demand loyalty, he earned it by proving his own devotion daily. When a wounded soldier was given water and immediately offered it to Alexander, the king famously poured it into the dirt, declaring he couldn't drink while his army thirsted. Stories like these weren't just acts of kindness, they were strategic masterstrokes in group psychology. His troops didn't follow him because they had to. They followed because they couldn't imagine abandoning someone who so visibly shared their struggles. Fast forward to Steve Jobs pacing barefoot across Apple's development floor, personally demoing prototypes to engineers at 2 in the morning, or Elon Musk sleeping on Tesla's factory floor during production crises. These modern icons echo Alexander's playbook leaders who don't just set visions but embody them. Charisma, it turns out, isn't some mystical gift reserved for a chosen few. The ancient Greeks called it charis, a quality that could be cultivated through consistent action. Alexander trained it like a muscle, through visible sacrifice, calculated vulnerability, and an uncanny ability to make every soldier feel seen. What separates theatrical gestures from genuine connection? The answer lies in what psychologists now term emotional contagion. Alexander's tears when his general Parmenion died weren't staged, they sparked real grief across his ranks. When he honored fallen enemies with full burial rites, it wasn't just diplomacy, it signaled respect that resonated deeply with his multicultural army. Today's most effective leaders harness this same authenticity. Howard Schultz didn't just rebuild Starbucks values from a boardroom. He reopened stores himself during the 2008 financial crisis, scrubbing espresso machines alongside baristas. Like Alexander rallying troops at the Hydaspes River, these actions create something no org chart can mandate: collective belief, the lesson for modern leaders. Charisma isn't about charm or eloquence, it's about congruence. When your team sees your choices align perfectly with your words, when they witness you endure the same pressures you ask them to bear, that's when loyalty transcends compliance. Alexander's empire eventually fractured, but the loyalty he inspired lasted lifetimes. Soldiers years later still spoke of marching with him as the defining experience of their lives. That's the enduring power of leadership that doesn't just direct, but truly connects. Hannibal's march across the Alps wasn't just a military maneuver, it was a masterclass in turning disaster into opportunity. Picture this: 37 war elephants, thousands of soldiers, and a supply chain stretched to its limits, all facing freezing temperatures, avalanches, and hostile tribes. Any rational commander would have seen these obstacles as reasons to turn back, but Hannibal, he saw them as tools. When landslides blocked his path, he ordered his men to heat rocks with vinegar until they cracked, an ingenious workaround using whatever they had. When local guides betrayed him, he adapted his route on the fly, turning their deception into a chance to surprise the Romans from an unexpected direction. This wasn't just survival, it was strategic alchemy, transforming every setback into a stepping stone. That same mindset separates thriving businesses from those that collapse when markets shift. Think of Netflix's pivot from mailing DVDs to streaming, or Nintendo's reinvention from playing cards to video games. Like Hannibal, they didn't cling to original plans when the terrain changed, they rewrote the rules. Hannibal understood something modern innovators rediscover again and again. Adaptability isn't about abandoning strategy, but refining it in real time. His elephants, seemingly impractical in snowy mountains, became psychological weapons, terrifying Roman scouts who'd never imagined such beasts could scale peaks. The lesson for today's leaders: constraints aren't barriers, they're creative fuel. When Airbnb's founders couldn't pay rent, they turned their apartment into a lodging space, a modern-day equivalent of Hannibal repurposing vinegar as a demolition tool. Both stories share a crucial thread: breakthrough success rarely follows a straight line. It's born from the willingness to see chaos as a canvas. Hannibal didn't conquer the Alps despite the challenges, he conquered because of them. And in a world where change is the only constant, that's the ultimate competitive edge. Julius Caesar didn't just command armies, he orchestrated belief. When his troops faced overwhelming odds in Gaul, he didn't rely on weapons alone. Instead, he staged divine signs, eagles appearing at key moments, sudden weather shifts framed as omens to convince his soldiers the gods favored them. This wasn't superstition, it was psychological warfare turned inward. Caesar understood that confidence could multiply strength, transforming shaky recruits into fanatically loyal legions. Modern labs have since confirmed his intuition. Studies show teams perform up to 30% better when they believe success is inevitable. Now consider how tech giants engineer that same certainty. Google's micro kitchens stocked with gourmet snacks aren't just perks, they're morale multipliers, signaling that employees are valued. Elon Musk's late-night factory visits during Tesla's production hell weren't mere oversight. They were performances of shared sacrifice, mirroring Caesar eating the same moldy bread as his troops during sieges. The principle is identical. When people feel their leader is invested, their effort compounds. But Caesar's real genius lay in balancing fear and inspiration. After crushing a rebellion, he famously pardoned former enemies, a move that shocked Rome. Why? He knew mercy could bind loyalty tighter than punishment. Corporate leaders echo this today. When Satya Nadella took over Microsoft, he replaced cutthroat competition with a growth mindset culture, turning skeptics into evangelists. Like Caesar distributing war spoils equally among his men, these gestures create something money can't buy: collective buy-in. The lesson transcends time. Whether rallying legions or rallying sales teams, the mechanics of morale remain unchanged. Recognition, shared purpose, and the illusion of advantage. Caesar's toolkit still drive peak performance. Because when people believe they're part of something inevitable, they'll march through hell to make it real. And that's the ultimate leverage in any arena where minds matter more than material. Scipio Africanus didn't just defeat Hannibal, he outthought him by stepping into his rival's mind. While other Roman generals saw Hannibal as an invincible monster, Scipio did something radical. He studied Carthaginian culture, learned their language, and even adopted some of their tactics. This wasn't admiration, it was psychological warfare. By understanding how Hannibal's army fought, what they feared, and what they valued, Scipio didn't just match his enemy, he anticipated his every move. At the Battle of Zama, he used Hannibal's own elephants against him, creating lanes in his formation that channeled the charging beasts harmlessly through his ranks. That's the power of empathy as a strategic tool, not softness, but a way to turn insight into advantage. Fast forward to modern deal-making, where the best negotiators operate the same way. Ever noticed how top salespeople mirror their clients' speech patterns or reference personal details early in conversations? That's not small talk, it's Scipio's playbook in a suit. A study at Stanford found that negotiators who spent just 5 minutes learning about their counterparts' interests before a discussion achieved better outcomes 70% of the time. Like Scipio learning Carthaginian battle hymns to predict troop morale, today's leaders use emotional intelligence to read unspoken cues: a clenched jaw during a contract discussion, excitement in a client's voice when mentioning certain features. Marketing takes this even further. Brands like Nike or Apple don't just sell products, they tap into identities. When Apple's Think Different campaign celebrated rebels and visionaries, they weren't advertising computers, they were aligning with how their customers saw themselves. Scipio would have recognized the tactic instantly. He knew victory came from speaking to what people cherished most, whether it was a soldier's pride or a citizen's fear. But here's the critical nuance: empathy isn't about being nice, it's about being effective. Scipio didn't spare Hannibal out of kindness, he exploited his understanding to strike harder. Modern businesses use the same principle. Amazon's recommendation algorithm isn't just helpful, it's a masterclass in predicting desires before customers articulate them. Like Scipio observing Carthaginian supply routes to find weaknesses, data analysts track browsing habits to pinpoint exactly when someone's ready to buy. The lesson transcends time. Whether you're leading a team, pitching an idea, or navigating a competitive market, success hinges on seeing the world through others' eyes, not to agree with them, but to engage them where they're most receptive. Scipio proved that the general who knows his enemy's dreams and dreads holds the real advantage. And in today's world, where influence is currency, that insight remains the ultimate edge. The Roman legion didn't just march, it moved as a single, terrifying machine. Every soldier knew his place, every centurion his role, and every maneuver was practiced until it became second nature. This wasn't just order for order's sake, it was a psychological weapon. When enemies saw Rome's troops advance in perfect unison, shields locked, swords raised as one, they weren't just facing an army, they were facing inevitability. That relentless discipline turned individual soldiers into an unstoppable force, proving that structure isn't the enemy of creativity, but its foundation. Fast forward to today's most successful organizations, and you'll find the same blueprint. Amazon's warehouse efficiency, with its meticulously timed workflows and standardized processes, echoes the legion's precision. Just as Roman soldiers trained daily with weighted weapons to build muscle memory, tech giants like Google mandate continuous upskilling, coding boot camps, leadership drills, crisis simulations, all designed to make excellence habitual. The principle is identical. Repetition under pressure transforms competence into mastery. But here's what the Romans understood that modern leaders often forget: discipline isn't about control. It's about freedom. Legionaries weren't mindless automatons. Their training gave them the confidence to adapt mid-battle because their fundamentals were rock solid. When a formation broke, they could improvise, knowing every soldier shared the same ingrained reflexes. Pixar animators operate the same way. Their legendary brain trust meetings, where films are ruthlessly critiqued frame by frame, might seem rigid. Yet that structure fuels creativity, just as Rome's standardized gladius techniques allowed soldiers to focus on strategy rather than fumbling with their swords. The real genius of Rome's system, scalability. Whether defending a frontier outpost or besieging a city, the legion's structure held. Modern franchises like McDonald's replicate this. A Big Mac in Tokyo tastes identical to one in Toronto because every step, from burger patty thickness to fryer temperature, is codified. Like Rome's military manuals, these protocols ensure consistency at scale. But the lesson goes deeper. Discipline isn't just about maintaining standards, it's about creating a shared language. When a Roman centurion shouted a command, every soldier from Hispania to Syria reacted identically. Today, when a Starbucks barista hears triple venti, that same instant understanding kicks in. Where Rome truly excelled was turning discipline into identity. Soldiers didn't just follow rules, they wore their armor with pride, knowing it marked them as part of something elite. Modern companies like Apple harness this same psychology. Their minimalist design ethos isn't just an aesthetic choice, it's a cultural signature that every employee internalizes, from engineers to retail staff. The result, a legion of brand ambassadors as devoted as Caesar's veterans. The takeaway is clear: chaos thrives where discipline falters. Rome's legions conquered the known world not through sheer numbers, but because their systems transformed ordinary men into an extraordinary collective. In an age of distraction and shortcuts, that's a reminder worth heeding. Whether leading a startup or a Fortune 500 team, the framework remains unchanged. Structure liberates, repetition empowers, and shared discipline forges unbeatable unity. Because when everyone moves in sync, even the impossible becomes routine. Genghis Khan didn't care about your family name or where you came from, only what you could do. In a world where medieval kings ruled by divine right and nobles inherited power, the Mongol leader built history's largest contiguous empire by flipping the script entirely. His armies promoted blacksmiths to generals and enslaved warriors to commanders based on one ruthless criterion: competence. This wasn't just fairness, it was strategic genius. While European knights wasted talent by excluding anyone without a coat of arms, Khan's meritocracy turned shepherds into strategists and outsiders into loyal lieutenants. The result, a military machine so adaptable it conquered from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea in less than a lifetime. Sound familiar? Fast forward 8 centuries to Silicon Valley's founding myth, the garage startup where hoodie-clad coders overturn industries dominated by corporate dynasties. Google's early motto, "Don't be evil," wasn't just ethical posturing, it was a rejection of old-world hierarchies in favor of Khan's playbook. When Sheryl Sandberg rose from Harvard intern to Facebook COO, or when Sundar Pichai, the son of an electrical engineer in India, took Google's helm, they proved the same timeless truth: systems that reward ability over pedigree attract and unleash extraordinary potential. But here's what modern startups often miss: Khan's meritocracy wasn't just about opportunity, it was about accountability. Mongol commanders who failed were demoted, regardless of past victories. Contrast that with today's corporate cultures where failing upwards remains shockingly common. Khan's real innovation was creating a feedback loop where merit wasn't a one-time ticket to privilege but an ongoing requirement. Tech giants mimic this today through stack ranking and relentless performance reviews, though rarely with the Mongols' transparency, the psychological brilliance. Meritocracies don't just elevate talent, they motivate it. When Khan's soldiers saw a low-born archer promoted for saving a unit, they didn't resent him, they trained harder. Modern research confirms this. A Columbia University study found that teams with clear merit-based rewards outperformed those with ambiguous promotion criteria by nearly 40%. Whether in 13th century Mongolia or a 21st century tech hub, people fight hardest when they know effort translates directly to advancement. Yet Khan's system had a twist: modern leaders often overlook diversity as a force multiplier. His armies integrated Chinese engineers, Persian administrators, and Turkic horsemen, valuing each for unique skills rather than imposing uniformity. When Apple's design team blends artists from Tokyo, engineers from Munich, and marketers from Lagos, they're channeling the same principle. Homogeneous groups echo existing ideas, diverse ones shatter ceilings. The lesson transcends empires and industries. From Mongol horse archers to Google's algorithm writers, the pattern holds. When you remove arbitrary barriers, talent doesn't just emerge, it dominates. Because whether you're uniting step tribes or disrupting markets, the best way to build an unstoppable team hasn't changed in 800 years. Find the hungriest, most capable people wherever they're hiding and give them room to run. The rest writes itself. Napoleon didn't just move armies, he shattered expectations. While his enemies were still drafting battle plans, he'd already crossed borders, seized supplies, and positioned his artillery on high ground. His Italian campaign of 1796 stunned Europe, covering over 1,000 miles in 30 days, fighting 6 major battles and upending centuries of slow, methodical warfare. This wasn't just speed for speed's sake, it was psychological domination. By the time opponents realized what was happening, they were already surrounded, demoralized, and outmaneuvered. Napoleon grasped a truth modern startups live by. Velocity creates its own advantage. Think about how tech giants operate today. When Amazon launches same-day delivery or TikTok's algorithm pushes viral trends in hours, they're using Napoleon's playbook. Speed forces competitors into reactive mode, scrambling to catch up while you set the terms. Research from Harvard Business School shows companies that scale innovations faster than rivals capture 72% more market share in their first year. That's not luck, it's the Napoleon effect. Just as he exploited Austria's plodding bureaucracy to seize Milan before they could rally, Uber outpaced taxi regulators worldwide by flooding cities with rideshares before laws could adapt. But here's what most miss: Napoleon's speed wasn't recklessness. It was precision timed to exploit hesitation. Before the Battle of Austerlitz, he deliberately abandoned strategic high ground, baiting Russian and Austrian forces into a slow, cautious advance. Then, as dawn fog lifted, he struck their overextended center with brutal efficiency. Modern disruptors use similar tactics. Ever notice how Apple announces products months before release? That's not poor planning, it's freezing competitors' development cycles as they panic, redesigned to match specs that don't even exist yet. The deeper lesson. Speed isn't just about moving first, it's about controlling the clock. Napoleon's famous March Divided, Fight United strategy had columns moving separately to confuse enemies, then converging instantly for battle. Today's equivalent, agile development teams working in sprints, iterating prototypes while traditional firms wait for perfect products. Like Napoleon's core system, where each unit could operate independently yet combine seamlessly, modern modular companies outmaneuver bloated bureaucracies. Yet the true brilliance lay in how Napoleon weaponized unpredictability. His troops could march 50 miles in 36 hours, appearing where geography said was impossible. When Netflix shifted from DVDs to streaming, Blockbuster dismissed it as a niche experiment until the landscape changed irreversibly. Both cases reveal the same insight: humans are wired to underestimate exponential change. Napoleon didn't just exploit physical speed, he exploited cognitive lag, the delay between seeing disruption and believing it matters. So what's the takeaway for today's leaders? Whether you're launching a product or pivoting a career, velocity alters perceptions. Moving fast isn't just efficient, it reshapes how others gauge what's possible. Because history proves one constant: the world belongs to those who act while others are still deciding. And in that gap between hesitation and action, empires are won. The walls of a besieged city weren't just physical barriers, they were psychological battlegrounds where patience and perception decided fates. Ancient commanders understood something modern CEOs and politicians rediscover daily: breaking spirits often wins wars faster than breaking gates. Take the Siege of Tyre in 332 BC, where Alexander the Great didn't just build causeways, he staged elaborate ruses. His engineers constructed massive siege towers, then deliberately let them burn in view of the defenders, creating an illusion of desperation. The next morning, Tyre's citizens woke to find Alexander's real assault force already scaling their undefended walls. The lesson: what people believe shapes reality more than facts. Centuries later, the Mongols perfected siege psychology with chilling efficiency. When Genghis Khan's forces surrounded a city, they'd often let a few escape, not from mercy but strategy. Those fleeing survivors became living propaganda, spreading tales of Mongol ruthlessness to the next target. The result: towns hundreds of miles away would surrender without a fight, their morale shattered by stories rather than swords. This wasn't just cruelty, it was calculated leverage of human nature. Modern corporations use similar tactics during hostile takeovers, leaking strategic losses to depress stock prices before swooping in with lowball offers. But perhaps the most insidious siege weapon was time itself. The Romans knew starvation worked slower than assault, but more thoroughly. During the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD, they encircled the city for months, letting factional infighting and hunger do their work. By the time legionaries breached the walls, the defenders were already broken from within. Today's equivalent plays out in boardrooms where activist investors slowly accumulate shares, whispering doubts to nervous stakeholders until leadership capitulates without a public fight. The brilliance of psychological sieges lies in their economy. Why waste resources storming a gate when you can convince the enemy to open it? Medieval commanders grasped this, employing everything from fake deserters spreading disinformation to projecting divine omens. At the Siege of Orleans, Joan of Arc didn't just lead charges, she orchestrated her entire image as God's messenger, demoralizing English troops who believed they fought against heaven's will. Modern branding experts operate the same way. When Tesla releases a cryptic tweet about an upcoming product, it's not just marketing, it's a morale raid on competitors' R&D departments, making them question whether they're already behind. What ancient generals and modern strategists share is the recognition that conflict is never purely physical. Whether it's a fortress under bombardment or a company fending off a takeover, the real battle happens in the minds of those involved. Because when confidence crumbles, resistance follows, and that's why the art of the siege, ancient or digital, remains timeless. Control the narrative, and you control the outcome. Sun Tzu's words cut straight to the heart of strategy. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. This wasn't just poetic wisdom, it was a battle-tested formula. Imagine a general standing on a hill before dawn, not just scanning enemy campfires, but weighing his own troops' exhaustion levels, supply routes, and the unspoken tension in their ranks. That's the duality Sun Tzu demanded: relentless honesty about your weaknesses paired with forensic analysis of your rivals' patterns. Fast forward to today's corporate war rooms, where this ancient principle shapes billion-dollar decisions. Every modern SWOT analysis, those grids mapping strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, is Sun Tzu's philosophy distilled into bullet points. When Disney acquired Marvel, they didn't just see a comic book company. They recognized their own aging princess franchises needed Marvel's cultural relevance with young audiences. That's know yourself in action. Meanwhile, Netflix's decision to pivot from mailing DVDs to streaming, that was know your enemy, seeing blockbusters' brick-and-mortar model as a vulnerability rather than an untouchable empire. But here's where most misinterpret Sun Tzu. Self-awareness isn't just about cataloging flaws, it's about leveraging them. The Mongols turned their smaller numbers into an advantage by perfecting mobility, making their weakness their deadliest trait. Similarly, Apple's Think Different campaign transformed their underdog status against Microsoft into a rallying cry. And competitor analysis, it's not corporate espionage, it's pattern recognition. Amazon studies retail competitors' delivery times like ancient scouts tracking supply caravans, identifying exactly where to strike for maximum impact. The real genius lies in how these principles intertwine. When Starbucks saw McDonald's launching dollar coffees, they didn't slash prices, they doubled down on ambience and premium beans because they knew their self was about experience, not cost. That's Sun Tzu's full lesson. Victory comes from aligning your authentic capabilities with your opponent's blind spots. Modern tools have only sharpened this edge. Data analytics now let companies track rivals' moves in real time, the digital equivalent of Sun Tzu's scouts reporting enemy troop movements. But the human element remains irreplaceable. Just as Hannibal understood Roman commanders' pride would lure them into traps at Cannae, today's negotiators watch for micro-expressions that reveal when a counterpart is bluffing. Perhaps the most profound application is personal. Before Sheryl Sandberg took Facebook's COO role, she famously created a dream job list, not just skills needed, but environments where she thrived. That's Know Yourself applied to career strategy. Meanwhile, job candidates researching hiring managers' LinkedIn posts before interviews. That's Know Your Enemy on a micro scale. The through line is clear. From chariot battles to boardroom battles, success hinges on seeing the full board, your pieces and theirs. Because whether you're commanding legions or leading startups, the first victory always happens in the mind. Master that, and the rest follows. The Spartans didn't just endure hardship, they worshipped it. While other ancient Greek city-states built lavish academies, Sparta's training grounds were deliberately brutal, designed to break boys down so they could rebuild themselves stronger. This wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake, it was a calculated philosophy. By the age of 12, Spartan youths had already survived nights alone in the wilderness, endured public whippings without flinching, and learned to steal food, not out of desperation, but to cultivate resourcefulness under pressure. The message was clear: comfort weakens, adversity forges. Flash forward to modern psychology, and you'll find science validating what Sparta knew instinctively. Stanford researcher Carol Dweck's groundbreaking work on growth mindset echoes the Spartan creed, the belief that abilities aren't fixed, but honed through challenge. When Navy SEAL candidates hit the circus, their infamous Hell Week of sleep deprivation and freezing ocean swims, they're not being punished, they're being Spartanized. Elite military units and Fortune 500 leadership programs now intentionally design stress scenarios because they understand what the Spartans proved: resilience isn't innate. It's built through repeated exposure to difficulty, just as muscles grow through resistance. But here's where Sparta's approach holds a masterclass for modern leaders. Their training wasn't just physical, it was psychological theater. Young warriors were sent to live among the Helots, Sparta's enslaved class, not to oppress them, but to confront their deepest fear: losing status. This engineered humility created leaders who understood fragility as much as strength. Today's equivalent: executives like Satya Nadella sending Microsoft's leadership teams to work frontline tech support, or Walmart managers spending nights stocking shelves during holiday rushes. Like Spartans returning from the Helot villages, they gain something no seminar can teach: a visceral empathy for every tier of their organization. The Spartans also grasped a counterintuitive truth: adversity needs meaning to transform. When a mother handed her son his shield before battle, she didn't say, "Come back safe," as she said, "with it or on it," meaning victory or death. That extreme ethos worked because it tied suffering to purpose. Modern resilience training misses this at its peril. Boot camps and corporate grit workshops often focus on pushing limits without connecting them to a greater why. Compare that to SpaceX engineers pulling all-nighters to hit launch windows. Their exhaustion isn't arbitrary. It's in service of colonizing Mars. Like Spartan warriors defending their homeland, they tolerate hardship because it's woven into a story worth enduring for. Perhaps Sparta's most enduring lesson is that resilience isn't solitary. Their famed phalanx formation, where shields overlap to protect the soldier next to you, wasn't just tactics, it was a metaphor for collective fortitude. When one faltered, others closed the gap. Modern organizations, from hospitals to tech startups, now replicate this with buddy systems and psychological safety protocols. The U.S. Marines Leadership Manual even quotes Spartan poet Tyrtaeus. "It is beautiful when a brave man falls fighting for his country," the underlying principle. Resilience thrives in communities where struggle is shared, not shamed. So what does this mean for you? Whether you're leading a team, building a career, or facing personal challenges, Sparta's ethos offers a blueprint. Seek controlled discomfort, tie hardship to purpose, and remember, the shield you carry isn't just yours, it shelters everyone beside you. Because 2,000 years later, one truth remains unbroken: the toughest steel isn't forged in open air. It's shaped in fire. The Roman legions didn't just feed their troops, they weaponized bread. When Julius Caesar marched into Gaul, his engineers didn't just build roads, they constructed a network of grain depots stretching hundreds of miles. This wasn't just practicality, it was psychological warfare. Enemy tribes watching endless supply wagons roll in realized resistance was futile. Why? Because consistent logistics signaled inevitability. The message was clear: Rome could outlast any siege, outmarch any foe, and outthink any rebellion. Fast forward 2,000 years, and Amazon's same-day delivery isn't just convenient, it's the same tactic in a cardboard box. When customers know they can get anything by sundown, loyalty isn't a choice, it's reflex. Consider Hannibal's most overlooked weapon, his supply lines. While historians focus on elephants crossing the Alps, his real genius was sustaining an army deep in enemy territory for 15 years. How? By seizing Roman granaries and burning the rest. Every scorched field wasn't just denying food, it was broadcasting dominance. Modern retailers play this same mind game. Walmart's real-time inventory systems don't just prevent stockouts, they create an illusion of infinite abundance. When shoppers see fully stocked shelves during a snowstorm, they don't just see products, they see an unshakable system that never falters. But here's where ancient logistics hold a masterclass for modern leaders. Alexander the Great didn't just move supplies, he moved expectations. After conquering Persia, he didn't impose Greek customs. He adopted Persian dress and married a local princess. Then he did something revolutionary. He built identical cities from Egypt to India, each with standardized markets, granaries, and roads. The psychological impact was profound. Conquered peoples didn't see an invader, they saw a system that worked. Apple stores replicate this today. Whether you're in Tokyo or Toronto, the same minimalist tables, the same product displays, the same genius bar. Like Alexander's cities, this consistency doesn't just serve function, it broadcasts unstoppable reliability. The Mongols took this further, turning mobility itself into a supply chain. Their cavalry traveled with multiple horses per soldier, switching mounts to cover 100 miles a day. But their secret weapon, the Yam route system, a network of relay stations with fresh horses and supplies spaced every 20 miles. This let messengers outpace rumors, creating an empire where information moved faster than fear. Compare that to FedEx's Memphis superhub, where planes converge nightly like Mongol horsemen, ensuring no package is ever more than one flight from anywhere. The principle is identical: control the flow and you control the narrative. Yet the ultimate psychological power of logistics lies in its invisibility. When Scipio Africanus besieged Carthage, he didn't just blockade the city, he let one shipment of grain through. Not enough to sustain them, just enough to spark infighting over scraps. Modern corporations use similar pressure. Ever notice how airlines release just enough discount seats to make you book quickly, but never enough for everyone? That's not yield management, it's Scipio's divide and conquer strategy applied to pricing algorithms. From Roman road networks to algorithmic supply chains, the lesson endures. Logistics don't just support strategy, they are strategy. Because when you master movement, you don't just deliver goods, you deliver certainty. And in warfare or business, nothing is more powerful than making your advantage feel inevitable. Ramesses II didn't just win battles, he sculpted memory itself. After the bloody stalemate at Kadesh against the Hittites, the pharaoh didn't merely return home. He transformed defeat into triumph across temple walls, carving scenes of his solitary valor while omitting his army's near rout. This wasn't vanity, it was viral marketing, Bronze Age style. Those towering reliefs at Abu Simbel weren't history, they were the ancient world's press releases, shaping perceptions for generations who'd never witnessed the actual battle. Fast forward to today's boardrooms, where perception management follows the same playbook. When a tech company rebrands a product failure as a strategic pivot, or a politician reframes a scandal as a learning opportunity, they're wielding Ramesses' chisel with PowerPoint slides. The medium has changed from stone to screens, but the psychology remains identical. Control the narrative, and you control reality. Instagram influencers airbrushing their lives aren't so different from Assyrian kings commissioning victory obelisks that glossed over casualties. Both understand that legacy isn't about what happened, it's about what people believe happened. What makes propaganda timeless isn't deception, but emphasis. Augustus didn't invent Rome's transition from republic to empire. He curated it, filling libraries with Virgil's Aeneid to frame his rule as destiny rather than coup. Modern corporations employ the same selective storytelling. Coca-Cola's archives highlight vintage holiday ads while downplaying early cocaine-laced formulas. Oil companies fund climate research that emphasizes uncertainty over consensus. Like Augustus' poets, these aren't outright lies, they're strategic spotlights, illuminating favorable facts while leaving inconvenient truths in shadow. The real power lies in repetition. Ramesses didn't carve his Kaddish narrative once. He replicated it across Egypt until the story became truth. Social media algorithms now execute this at scale, amplifying messages through shares and likes until fringe ideas feel mainstream. A study at MIT found false news spreads 6 times faster than truth online, not because we're gullible, but because our brains, like ancient temple visitors, mistake ubiquity for validity. When we see a claim everywhere from Twitter to podcasts, we assume it must hold weight, just as Egyptians assumed Kaddish was a victory because every wall proclaimed it so. Yet the most potent propaganda often wears the disguise of authenticity. When Julius Caesar penned his commentaries on the Gallic Wars, he wrote in third person, creating an illusion of objectivity while subtly exaggerating barbarian threats to justify his campaigns. Today's equivalent, brands hiring real customers for scripted testimonials, or politicians staging grassroots movements with paid protesters. The effectiveness hinges on the same principle. People distrust overt ads but embrace what feels organic. Where ancient and modern propaganda diverge is velocity. Pharaohs needed years to carve their stories in stone. Today's narratives can pivot in minutes. When a celebrity tweet sparks outrage, PR teams don't build obelisks, they flood platforms with counter-messaging before the algorithm locks in a negative trend. But the core strategy remains unchanged. Flood the zone with your version until it drowns out others. The lesson for digital age leaders, whether you're managing a personal brand or a multinational, recognize that facts alone rarely win wars or market share. Like Ramesses' chiseling at Abu Simbel, your true battlefield isn't events themselves, but how they're remembered, because history, like search engine results, belongs to those who shape its telling. Hannibal didn't just defeat Rome at Cannae, he rewrote the rules of engagement. When his vastly outnumbered forces faced 80,000 Roman legionaries, he didn't meet strength with strength. Instead, he lured them into a deadly embrace, his center deliberately retreating while cavalry circled unseen to seal the trap. The result, history's most famous pincer movement, where an entire army was annihilated not through brute force, but by redefining the battlefield itself. That same tactical brilliance echoes in today's corporate upheavals. where market leaders aren't toppled head on, they're flanked by innovators who change the game entirely. Take Netflix's assault on Blockbuster. The video rental giant didn't collapse because Netflix offered better DVDs. It fell because Reed Hastings shifted the terrain. While Blockbuster focused on optimizing store layouts and late fees, Netflix bypassed physical locations entirely, mailing discs directly to homes. Then, just as Hannibal's cavalry closed the trap at Cannae, Netflix pivoted to streaming, attacking from an entirely new direction Blockbuster hadn't even considered defending. The lesson: disruption doesn't compete on the incumbents' terms. It makes their advantages irrelevant. This strategy of redefining the battlefield plays out everywhere. Uber didn't build better taxis, they made car ownership optional. Airbnb didn't undercut hotels, they turned spare rooms into inventory. Like Hannibal exploiting the Roman army's rigid formations, these disruptors identified inflexibilities in traditional models and struck where resistance was weakest. Even language reflects the parallel. We call it side hustling or end-running competition, modern slang for ancient flanking maneuvers. What makes flanking so devastating is its psychological dimension. At Cannae, Hannibal's retreating center wasn't just a tactic, it was theater, playing on Roman commanders' overconfidence. Similarly, when Tesla first launched, Detroit laughed at their low production numbers. But Elon Musk wasn't trying to outsell Ford factories. He was rewriting consumer expectations around performance and sustainability, making gas engines feel archaic. By the time legacy automakers mobilized electric vehicle teams, Tesla had already claimed the high ground of cultural cachet. The most brilliant flanking moves often disguise themselves as something else entirely. Just as Hannibal's Alpine crossing seemed like madness until elephants appeared behind Roman lines, Amazon's move into cloud computing looked like a distraction from retail until AWS became its profit engine. True disruption doesn't announce itself with fanfare, it quietly builds bridges over your moat. For modern strategists, the takeaway is clear. Whether you're launching a product or navigating a career, ask not just how to compete, but where the real battle will be fought in 5 years. Because victory seldom goes to the strongest, it goes to those who choose the terrain. And sometimes, like Hannibal staring at the Alps, that means taking the path no one expects. Attila the Hun didn't just conquer cities, he weaponized dread itself. His armies moved with such ruthless efficiency that rumors of their approach could empty towns before a single arrow was loosed. This wasn't accidental, it was psychological warfare perfected. By allowing stories of his brutality to spread, entire villages vanishing, enemies impaled on stakes, Attila turned fear into an invisible army that marched ahead of his actual forces. The strategy worked until it didn't, because terror, unchecked, has a way of circling back like a boomerang. When Attila's subjects finally rebelled, it wasn't just against his demands, it was against the unrelenting tension of living under a leader whose primary tool was intimidation. Modern psychology reveals why this backfires. Studies on workplace dynamics show that while fear can spike short-term productivity, it erodes trust, creativity, and loyalty over time. Think of a manager who rules through constant threats of layoffs. Employees may meet quotas, but they'll also disengage, cut corners, or leave at the first opportunity. Contrast that with leaders like Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, who balanced stern resolve with profound empathy. When he visited wounded soldiers or wrote personal letters to grieving families, he wasn't just being kind, he was reinforcing that their sacrifices mattered. That duality, strength tempered with humanity, is what turns subjects into followers and employees into advocates. The ancient world offers a masterclass in this balance. Genghis Khan, often portrayed as a mindless barbarian, actually outlawed torture among his ranks and promoted religious tolerance in conquered lands. His infamous reputation for violence was selectively deployed enough to deter resistance, but never so much that it unified enemies against him. Similarly, Roman emperors understood the power of bread and circuses, keeping populations just content enough that fear of disorder outweighed resentment of oppression. Today's most effective leaders mirror this nuanced approach. When Microsoft's Satya Nadella took over, he faced a culture where stack rankings had employees competing instead of collaborating. His solution: replace fear with growth mindset principles, acknowledging mistakes as learning opportunities rather than failures punishable by demotion. The result: innovation skyrocketed because people stopped hiding problems and started solving them. Yet fear still has its place, not as a bludgeon, but as a scalpel. Steve Jobs' infamous intensity wasn't arbitrary. He used it strategically to push teams beyond perceived limits. The difference between tyranny and leadership lies in intent. Are you leveraging discomfort to uplift or simply to control? Navy SEAL training breaks recruits down not to crush them, but to show them their own unrealized capacity. That's the sweet spot: fear as a temporary catalyst, not a permanent climate. The takeaway: whether you're leading a team, a company, or simply navigating personal relationships, remember what Attila learned too late. Fear can clear a path, but only respect builds roads that last. Because when the dust settles, people follow those who make them brave, not those who keep them afraid. Sun Tzu observed that terrain decides more battles than bravery ever could. His ancient treatise outlined 9 varieties, from open ground to deadly passes, each demanding unique tactics. But here's what modern leaders often miss: terrain isn't just physical. Markets, industries, even office cultures form their own invisible landscapes where adaptation spells survival. When Airbnb faced the COVID collapse, they didn't just cut costs, they redefined their terrain entirely. With travel frozen, they pivoted to living anywhere, promoting long-term stays and remote work packages. This wasn't retreat, it was recalibration, shifting from tourist destinations to home offices in the suburbs. Like a general surveying shifting battlefields, they recognized that clinging to old maps guarantees defeat. The brilliance of terrain theory lies in its flexibility. Sun Tzu warned against fixed strategies, urging commanders to shape themselves according to the enemy. Netflix embodies this principle. When broadband speeds made streaming viable, they abandoned DVD mailers, not reluctantly, but ruthlessly, even rebranding their entire service. Meanwhile, Blockbuster clung to storefronts like an army defending a hill long after the war moved elsewhere. The lesson: terrain isn't static. Technological shifts, cultural trends, even global crises redraw competitive landscapes overnight. Kodak invented the digital camera but treated it as a novelty rather than the avalanche that would bury their film empire. Some terrains demand camouflage. Starbucks in Italy, espresso's birthplace, initially flopped by imposing American-sized drinks on a culture that prizes brief, standing coffee breaks. Their comeback came not through dominance but deference: smaller cups, local ingredients, and baristas trained in Italian traditions. Like Sun Tzu's advice for confined terrain, where subtlety trumps force, they adapted rather than asserted. Conversely, Tesla's Cybertruck deliberately clashes with automotive norms, a move suited for open ground, where shock value disrupts complacency. The most treacherous terrain is often psychological. When Microsoft launched the Xbox, Sony's PlayStation dominated gaming culture. Instead of competing directly, Microsoft courted developers with easier tools and embraced online multiplayer years before Sony took it seriously. They weren't just selling consoles, they were cultivating an ecosystem, a strategic high ground where network effects would outmuscle hardware specs. Ultimately, terrain mastery means reading beyond the obvious. Amazon didn't just see the internet as a storefront, they saw its potential to dissolve geographic limits and rewrite retail logistics. Like Hannibal crossing the Alps, they turned apparent obstacles into avenues no one else envisioned. Because whether on ancient battlefields or in boardrooms, victory favors those who don't just navigate the landscape, they reshape it. The Byzantine Empire didn't defend its gates with brute force, it guarded them with theater. When enemies besieged Constantinople, emperors would stage elaborate deceptions, lighting extra fires to exaggerate troop numbers, parading the same elite soldiers past spy posts multiple times, even dangling empty treasure chests from walls to taunt invaders with false promises of plunder. This wasn't just trickery, it was psychological judo, using an opponent's assumptions against them. Fast forward to today's product launches, where companies like Apple deliberately leak incomplete specs before keynotes, letting competitors scramble to match features that don't exist while the real innovation stays hidden. The principle remains unchanged: control attention, and you control the game. Consider how modern negotiations employ these ancient tactics. High-stakes dealmakers often anchor discussions with trivial demands, not because they care about those points, but to divert focus from their true objectives. It's the corporate equivalent of Byzantine emperors feigning interest in peace treaties while secretly reinforcing defenses. A study in the Harvard Negotiation Law Review found that skilled negotiators use misdirection 3 times more often than amateurs, deliberately emphasizing minor concessions to obscure major gains. Like the Byzantines sacrificing unimportant border towns to protect Constantinople, they trade pawns to keep queens. The most effective misdirection often hides in plain sight. Byzantine Admiral Narses once won a naval battle by ordering his ships to row backward, a move so bizarre it paralyzed enemy commanders long enough for his real attack to unfold. Today's equivalent, tech CEOs dropping cryptic tweets about disruptive innovations that turn out to be mundane updates while their actual breakthroughs develop unnoticed. Twitter's early days exemplified this perfectly. While critics mocked its character limit as a gimmick, the team was quietly refining algorithms that would redefine global communication. What makes misdirection timeless isn't deception, it's economy. Why exhaust resources defending every flank when you can make opponents question which flank matters? The Byzantines perfected shadow armies, wooden cutouts propped along walls that forced enemies to waste arrows and energy. Modern marketing teams run similar plays with vaporware, announcing products years before launch to freeze competitor R&D budgets. Video game studios are particularly adept at this, generating hype for features that may never ship while keeping genuine innovations under wraps. The true art lies in balancing revelation and concealment. Emperor Justinian didn't just hide weaknesses, he flaunted strengths theatrically, commissioning mosaics that bathed Constantinople in gold light visible for miles. This calculated spectacle drew eyes from vulnerabilities elsewhere. Luxury brands master this today. Rolex doesn't just sell watches, they craft waiting lists and artificial scarcity that make acquisition feel like conquest. Like sunlight glinting off Byzantine domes, their brilliance isn't just aesthetic, it's strategic, blinding observers to alternative options. From palace intrigues to pitch meetings, one rule endures: the best defense isn't always a stronger wall, it's a better story. Because when you dictate what others focus on, you've already shaped the outcome before the first move is made. Elephants crashing through enemy lines weren't just weapons, they were psychological earthquakes. When Hannibal unleashed his war elephants at the Battle of Trebia, the sheer spectacle paralyzed Roman soldiers who'd never seen such beasts. The ground shook, trumpets blared, and suddenly, disciplined formations shattered like glass. This wasn't just about physical damage, it was about rupturing the enemy's sense of reality. Modern marketers understand this instinctively. Think of Apple's legendary "one more thing" product reveals the dramatic pauses, the darkened auditoriums, the collective gasps as Steve Jobs pulled MacBooks from manila envelopes. Like Hannibal's elephants, these moments aren't just announcements. They're calculated shocks that redefine expectations overnight. Chariots operated on similar principles. The Hittites didn't just use them for speed, they weaponized noise and dust, attaching metal plates that clanged like thunder as they charged. The effect. Opponents didn't just see an attack, they felt it viscerally, their fight-or-flight response hijacked before the first arrow flew. Today's equivalent plays out in tech keynotes where companies don't just launch products, they stage spectacles. Elon Musk shattering Cybertruck windows accidentally during a demo that wasn't a failure, it was a masterstroke. The ensuing media frenzy guaranteed more attention than any polished presentation could have achieved. Disruption, it turns out, thrives on controlled chaos. But shock tactics aren't just about spectacle, they're about timing. Alexander the Great's sudden night raid at Gaugamela didn't just surprise Persian forces, it exploited their belief that battles only began at dawn. By violating that unspoken rule, he turned their confusion into collateral damage. Modern disruptors follow the same playbook. When Netflix split its DVD and streaming services in 2011, the backlash was immediate, but so was the resetting of consumer expectations. What seemed like misstep was actually a brutal, necessary shock to pivot the entire industry toward streaming. Sometimes you have to break something to rebuild it stronger. The most effective shocks create vacuums for new ideas. When Roman legions first encountered war elephants, their initial terror gave way to innovation. They learned to scatter caltrops or drive flaming pigs toward the beasts. Similarly, Uber's explosive arrival didn't just disrupt taxis. It forced cities worldwide to reconsider decades-old transportation laws. True shock isn't an end goal, it's a catalyst. Just as chariots cleared paths for infantry, today's viral campaigns or AI breakthroughs don't just capture attention, they create openings for those quick enough to charge through. Because in battle or business, the moment your opponent freezes is the moment you seize the future. Cyrus the Great didn't just rule an empire, he redefined what leadership could look like. While other conquerors demanded absolute obedience, Cyrus pioneered a radical idea. Authority grows stronger when shared. After capturing Babylon in 539 BC, he didn't enslave its people or impose Persian customs. Instead, he returned sacred artifacts to temples, allowed exiled Jews to rebuild Jerusalem, and even funded their efforts. This wasn't weakness, it was strategic brilliance. By blending autocratic control over military strategy with collaborative governance in daily life, Cyrus built loyalty where others bred resentment. His empire became the first to span 3 continents, not because he crushed dissent, but because he channeled it. Centuries later, Google would stumble onto a similar formula with their famous 20% time. Policy engineers could spend 1/5 of their workweek on passion projects. The result, Gmail, AdSense, and Google News innovations worth billions that might never have emerged under rigid hierarchies. Like Cyrus balancing centralized rule with local autonomy, Google's approach recognized that true leadership isn't about choosing between command and collaboration, but knowing when each is essential. An engineer tweaking algorithms doesn't need a committee, but a company navigating ethical AI debates. That's where diverse voices prevent disaster. The key lies in reading the terrain. When Cyrus faced rebellious satraps, he didn't default to negotiation, he crushed them decisively, proving his strength. But when integrating conquered cultures, he switched modes, adopting their administrative systems and even worshipping their gods. Modern leaders face parallel choices. A CEO during a financial crisis can't poll employees for consensus. They must act with Cyrus-like resolve. Yet that same executive, when designing a 5-year vision, would be foolish to ignore frontline insights. Napoleon famously said, "A leader is a dealer in hope," but Cyrus would have added, "Hope flows differently through different channels." His legacy, and Google's, reveals that the most enduring leadership isn't a style but a spectrum. Sometimes you lead like a general marshalling troops, other times like a gardener nurturing growth. The art lies in knowing which moment calls for which hand. Because whether you're steering an ancient empire or a startup, rigid methods break but adaptable ones bend history. Scorched earth tactics didn't just destroy resources, they scorched reputations for centuries. When Roman generals poisoned wells to starve besieged cities, or Mongol armies salted farmland to ensure decades of famine, they won battles but lost something far more valuable: legitimacy. Fast forward to modern boardrooms, where data breaches and predatory algorithms can achieve similar short-term gains at catastrophic long-term cost. The parallel is stark. Whether you're wielding a sword or a spreadsheet, strategy divorced from ethics eventually collapses under its own weight. Take the infamous case of Sparta at Plataea. After defeating Persian-backed forces, the Spartans executed prisoners and banned proper burials, a move meant to terrify future enemies. But the backlash was swift. Greek city-states that might have allied with Sparta instead turned against them, horrified by the violation of sacred customs. Centuries later, Facebook faced its own Plataea moment when Cambridge Analytica's data harvesting came to light. Like the Spartans, they'd assumed overwhelming advantage justified any tactic. But trust, once burned, takes generations to rebuild. Yet ancient history also offers models of restraint. When Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon, he didn't massacre dissenters, he issued the Cyrus Cylinder, considered history's first human rights charter, guaranteeing religious freedom and banning slavery. The result: willful submission from neighboring regions that preferred his rule to their own kings. Modern corporations like Patagonia follow this playbook, trading short-term profits for long-term loyalty by championing environmental causes. Their Earth is now our only shareholder move wasn't just idealism. It was Cyrus-level strategic benevolence, converting ethics into enduring influence. The critical lesson: unethical shortcuts often appear faster until you account for their hidden toll. Rome's destruction of Carthage left it unchallenged in the Mediterranean, but also bereft of competitors that had once driven innovation. Today's tech monopolies risk similar stagnation when they crush startups rather than out-innovate them. Conversely, leaders like Abraham Lincoln studied the ancient Greeks not for their battle tactics, but for their debates on justice, proving that moral authority can be mightier than any army. Ultimately, the most formidable weapon isn't fear or deception, but the ability to say, "We won," without breaking what made victory meaningful. Because legacy isn't measured in territory seized or quarterly earnings reported. It's etched in whether those you conquered ever truly forgave you. Gladiators didn't just train their bodies, they sculpted their minds through relentless repetition, forging neural pathways as deliberately as blacksmiths temper steel. Recent neuroscience reveals what Roman combat instructors grasped instinctively. The brain rewires itself through focused practice, turning deliberate actions into reflexive instincts. When a gladiator drilled sword strikes thousands of times, he wasn't just building muscle memory, he was physically altering his brain's structure, thickening the connections between decision-making and movement until reaction times became near instantaneous. Modern MRI scans show similar changes in today's elite athletes and special forces operatives, proving that the ancient warriors' mind as weapon philosophy was rooted in biological truth. This neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, explains why Spartan boys began military training at age 7. Their childhoods weren't just about toughness, they were engineered to hardwire strategic thinking into developing brains. Like modern language immersion programs that rewire neural circuits for fluency, Sparta's Agoj program etched combat logic into young minds so deeply that tactics became second nature. Fast forward to Navy SEAL undergoing stress inoculation, where simulated battlefield conditions train their brains to remain calm amid chaos. The mechanism is identical. Repeated exposure to controlled adversity builds neural networks that default to clarity under fire. But here's where ancient trainers outpaced modern ones. Gladiatorial schools didn't just drill technique, they engineered entire cognitive ecosystems. Fighters practiced in roaring amphitheaters months before events, acclimating their brains to distractions until focus became unshakable. They studied opponents' tells like chess masters, training their visual cortex to spot micro-expressions signaling an adversary's next move. Modern sports science now confirms this holistic approach. Basketball players who visualize free throws activate the same motor cortex regions as physically shooting, proving that mental rehearsal literally reshapes the brain. The real breakthrough came in balancing adaptation with specialization. Roman gladiators were categorized into types: Retiarius with tridents, secutors with short swords, each honing distinct neural advantages. A Retiarius developed exceptional depth perception for net throwing, while a secutor's brain optimized for close quarters spatial awareness. Contemporary research validates this. London taxi drivers who memorize the city's labyrinthine streets develop enlarged hippocampi, the brain's navigation center. Whether mastering a trident or the knowledge-targeted practice doesn't just build skill, it redesigns the mind's architecture. What separates ancient and modern mastery is urgency. A gladiator's training carried existential stakes. Every misstep could mean death. This hyper-relevance supercharged neuroplasticity, much like how trauma survivors develop heightened threat detection. Modern habit formation often lacks this visceral stakes, which is why the most effective trainers now incorporate accountability mirrors the arena. CrossFit's public scoreboards, coding boot camps, demo days. They recreate the gladiator's perform or perish pressure that forces neural adaptation. The lesson for today's learners: whether you're mastering a language or leadership, the brain obeys ancient rules. Challenge it consistently, immerse it deeply, and like a gladiator walking onto sand, tie practice to purpose. Because the mind doesn't just learn, it evolves, and that transformation, more than any weapon, decides who leaves the arena victorious. Roman soldiers didn't just share tents, they shared sacred rites that turned strangers into brothers. Before every major campaign, legionaries gathered for the Sacramentum Militare, a blood oath where they swore allegiance not just to commanders but to each other. This wasn't empty ceremony, it was psychological alchemy. By mixing wine with their own blood in a ritual chalice, they transformed individual loyalty into collective devotion. Modern corporations chasing team synergy have stumbled onto the same truth, though their methods lack the visceral punch. Google's legendary TGIF meetings or Amazon's primitives brainstorming sessions aren't just productivity tools. They're secular sacraments designed to replicate that ancient binding magic. The brilliance of Roman rituals lay in their sensory depth. New recruits received the signaculum, a lead identity disc worn around the neck bearing their legion's symbol. Touching it before battle wasn't superstition, it was tactile reinforcement of belonging. Sales teams today unconsciously mirror this with branded swag, but the psychology runs deeper. When Microsoft hands out one-week hackathon participation badges or SpaceX Awards mission patches, they're not distributing trinkets, they're creating physical totems of shared purpose. Neuroscience confirms what centurions knew instinctively. Tactile rituals activate the brain's insular cortex, forging emotional connections no mission statement could replicate. Yet Rome's real mastery was in balancing unity with identity. Each legion had its own genius, a protective spirit celebrated through unique chants and symbols. The 9th Legion marched under a bull emblem, the 10th under a boar, creating nested loyalties where soldiers felt both part of the imperial machine and members of an elite fraternity. Modern militaries still use this playbook. Think Navy SEAL teams with their customized trident insignias, but tech giants have refined it further. Facebook's early hackathons weren't just coding marathons. They were initiation rites where new engineers earned stripes by pushing features live at midnight. Like legionaries proving themselves in mock battles, these trials transformed colleagues into comrades. The most potent rituals thrive on repetition. Roman legions didn't just take oaths once, they renewed them annually at the Feriae Latinae, a festival where rank dissolved as generals and grunts cooked meals together. Silicon Valley's obsession with weekly all-hands meetings and annual offsites follows the same rhythmic reinforcement. Stanford researchers found teams maintaining quarterly bonding rituals show 34% higher trust levels than those relying on sporadic events. The lesson: brotherhood isn't built in grand gestures, but in the drip feed of shared experience, whether it's centurions passing a wineskin or developers debating code over midnight pizza. Where ancient and modern practices diverge is in stakes. A legionary's ritual knife wasn't symbolic, it was the same blade that would defend his tent mate at dawn. When Zappos pays employees to quit during training, they're attempting to simulate that existential commitment, filtering out those unwilling to fully bond. But true cohesion demands more than opt-in exercises. It requires what the Romans called comilitium, the unspoken pact that you'll literally carry your wounded. Some firms approach this intensity. SpaceX engineers pulling consecutive all-nighters during Falcon launches describe the same primal solidarity as legionaries fortifying a night watch. The ultimate ritual weapon, shared suffering. Roman recruits trained under weighted packs called sarcina, brutal in the moment but transformative in hindsight. Modern equivalents range from Apple's product launch, death marches, to consulting firms' initiation hazing. Behavioral economists call this the effort justification principle. We value what we bleed for. When Netflix famously gave its team unlimited vacation but cultivated a culture where few took it, they weren't just maximizing productivity, they were creating a selective pressure that bonded those who stayed. Like legionaries laughing about blistered feet around a campfire, shared hardship etches bonds no retreat can manufacture. From marble temples to glass-walled boardrooms, the pattern holds. Groups that ritualize belonging don't just work together, they become something greater than the sum of their parts. Because whether you're donning a legion's crest or a startup's hoodie, the human need to belong remains the ultimate force multiplier. And those who master its rituals don't just build teams, they forge legacies. Before generals studied satellite images, they read entrails. Ancient commanders from Rome to China didn't just rely on scouts, they consulted oracles, scrutinized sacrificed animals' livers, and tracked celestial omens. Alexander the Great famously delayed his attack on Tyre for months, waiting until the gods signaled approval through priestly visions. This wasn't superstition, it was primitive data science. Without weather satellites or intelligence networks, divination offered something priceless, a framework to reduce paralyzing uncertainty. Fast forward to today's war rooms and boardrooms, where algorithms have replaced augury, but the fundamental drive remains identical. Modern executives don't slaughter goats, they slice through spreadsheets, seeking patterns in consumer behavior charts instead of star formations. Amazon's anticipatory shipping, which dispatches products before customers click buy, runs on the same principle as Roman generals interpreting bird flights. Both attempt to predict chaos before it unfolds. The tools have evolved from bronze knives to Python code, but the hunger for certainty, that's timeless. What's fascinating is how both systems grapple with noise. Ancient priests developed elaborate filters ignoring false omens that didn't fit strategic plans. Much like today's data scientists discard statistical outliers. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, he didn't wait for favorable signs. He reinterpreted ambiguous ones to justify his revolt. Modern corporations mirror this selective parsing. Facebook's early growth team famously prioritized good metrics like user engagement while downplaying warning signs about misinformation. Whether examining sheep intestines or a /B test results, humans have always cherry-picked signals that confirm desired paths. Yet the real parallel lies in delegation. Just as emperors employed professional augurs to shoulder the burden of high-stakes decisions, today's CEOs lean on AI systems as digital soothsayers. Google's ad auction algorithms make billions of micro-decisions daily, not unlike Delphi's Oracle channeling Apollo's will. Both systems create psychological distance between leaders and consequences, allowing them to say, "The data compelled us," instead of "I chose." There's comfort in deferring to higher powers, whether silicon or divine. The critical difference, ancient divination acknowledged its own uncertainty. Roman haruspices classified predictions as strong, wavering, or dark, a transparency rarely found in modern analytics dashboards proclaiming 99% confidence intervals. Perhaps that's why some hedge funds now blend machine learning with behavioral psychology, recognizing that pure quantification misses human irrationality. Like Hannibal balancing Carthaginian augurs with scouts' ground reports, the wisest leaders today triangulate between data and intuition. From smoke-filled temples to server-filled data centers, one truth endures: decision-making isn't about eliminating doubt, it's about moving forward despite it. Because whether you're reading the future in goat blood or Gaussian curves, the goal remains unchanged: to glimpse enough of tomorrow to act decisively today. Picture this, a scrappy tech startup operating out of a shared workspace with barely enough funding for coffee, let alone marketing. Yet within 18 months, they've outmaneuvered established competitors and secured a dominant market position. How? By treating their launch like Hannibal crossing the Alps, embracing constraints as strategic advantages. Instead of pouring limited resources into head-on advertising battles they couldn't win, they deployed Sun Tzu's principle of shaping the battlefield. First, they identified their rivals' most rigid assumptions, that enterprise clients only bought from brands with decades of credibility, and turned that into their opening gambit. They crafted case studies showcasing how their underdog status allowed faster innovation cycles than legacy providers bogged down by bureaucracy. This wasn't just spin, it was tactical reframing, making their small size a virtue rather than a liability. Like Alexander the Great facing Persia's vast armies, they realized competing on scale was futile, so they redefined the terms of engagement. Their website didn't boast about years in business. It featured a real-time counter displaying their engineers' coding streaks, turning transparency into a differentiator. Then came the feint. Months before their actual product launch, they seeded a cryptic LinkedIn post about disrupting traditional workflows through asymmetric design. Competitors dismissed it as startup bravado, until industry blogs picked up the thread, speculating wildly about what asymmetric might mean. By the time competitors scrambled to analyze this phantom threat, the startup had already secured pilot contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies. This was pure Sun Tzu, appearing weak when strong, then striking where least expected. Cash flow became their version of Hannibal's supply lines. Rather than burning capital on lavish offices, they allocated 80% of funds to engineering and customer success, mirroring how ancient generals prioritized veteran troops over ornate armor. When a rival offered to acquire them, they didn't just reject the offer, they leaked it selectively to industry analysts, creating buzz that positioned them as the insurgent worth watching. Their masterstroke, borrowing from the Byzantine playbook of controlled scarcity. Instead of a traditional beta launch, they granted early access only to clients who contributed product feedback, creating exclusivity while crowdsourcing improvements. Like Roman legions rewarding allied tribes with citizenship, they turned users into stakeholders. 6 months post-launch, their NPS scores dwarfed industry averages because customers felt invested in the product's evolution. The lesson isn't that startups should literally wage war, but that psychological strategy transcends eras. Whether you're commanding legions or leading a series around victory, favors those who see beyond brute force to the deeper game of perception, timing, and leveraged constraints. Because in boardrooms, as on battlefields, the mind is the ultimate terrain. And sometimes the best way to move forward is to study moves that worked 2,000 years ago. The thread connecting ancient battlefields to modern boardrooms isn't steel or spreadsheets, it's the unchanging wiring of the human mind. Centuries collapse, technologies evolve, but the way people respond to fear, loyalty, or surprise remains remarkably consistent. Alexander the Great's ability to inspire his troops through shared hardship mirrors how today's most effective CEOs rally their teams during crises. Sun Tzu's teachings on deception find new life in marketing campaigns that shape perceptions rather than just selling products. Even Hannibal's Alpine crossing, that legendary gamble, reflects the same high-stakes calculus startups use when pivoting into uncharted markets. What's striking isn't just that these strategies still work, it's why they work. Neuroscience confirms that our brains still process threats and rewards much like our ancestors did on those ancient battlefields. A Roman centurion motivating his men with promises of spoils triggers the same dopamine pathways as a modern sales team chasing quarterly bonuses. The Byzantine emperor's use of elaborate ceremonies to bond his court, that's the precursor to today's corporate retreats and team-building exercises, all tapping into our deep-seated need for belonging. But here's the crucial takeaway. These principles aren't about manipulation, they're about understanding. When Scipio Africanus studied Carthaginian culture to defeat Hannibal, he wasn't just gathering intelligence, he was practicing empathy at a strategic level. That same empathy lets modern leaders design workplaces where people feel valued, products that resonate emotionally, and negotiations where everyone leaves feeling heard. The Spartans' brutal training regimens revealed a truth now backed by psychology. Resilience isn't innate, it's built, and in an era of constant disruption, that's a lesson worth revisiting. So where does this leave you? Whether you're navigating office politics, launching a business, or simply trying to lead a more intentional life, these ancient playbooks offer more than tactics, they reveal patterns. The next time you face a challenge, ask yourself, what would Hannibal do? Not because you should march elephants through your problems, but because his creativity in redefining the battlefield might inspire you to reframe your own struggle. The arena may have shifted from bloodied soil to boardrooms, but the rules of engagement haven't. Strategy is eternal. The only question left is how you'll wield it. Drop your thoughts below. How have you seen these timeless principles play out in your world? Let's keep the conversation marching.